Welcome to This Explainer, everyone. Today, we are diving deep into the hauntings of Josué Velázquez. Now, this is widely considered to be the absolute darkest, most terrifying, and honestly, probably the most well-documented paranormal case in Mexican history. So, let's jump right in and look at the evidence.
You wanted to see me. Just imagine hearing those exact words spoken by some summoned entity right inside your own home. According to the original broadcast records, this one chilling sentence was basically the catalyst for everything we're about to explore. It kicked off a decade-long mystery that all started on a late-night radio broadcast back in October of 2002.
So, that broadcast was called La Mano Peluda, which translates to the hairy hand. It was this incredibly popular Mexican horror radio show in the early 2000s. You know, the kind of show where listeners would dial in late at night to share these supposedly real paranormal experiences with the host, Juan Ramón Sáenz. Well, on this one particular night in 2002, a seemingly completely normal caller named Josué Velázquez dials in from California. And he actually starts off super polite, congratulating Juan Ramón on the show's success. He sounds like a totally great guy. But that perception was about to change really quickly.
To really wrap our heads around how this all started, we have to look at Josué's psychological state. He revealed live on air that his family had suffered from severe, crushing poverty since he was just 14 years old. And it was that utter desperation that led him to find a mysterious book of black magic and dark rituals. But here's the thing, Josué didn't just casually flip through this book. His obsession actually drove him to learn Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, just so he could perfectly execute these ancient spells to contact Lucifer. He spent years meticulously performing these rituals until, finally, he claimed an entity appeared to him, and he said it looked completely human, and this entity offered him a deal.
But as you might guess, demonic deals do not come for free. The entity's demands escalated in this terrifying rule of threes. First, it started with animal sacrifices, like goats. But then, the entity demanded something truly horrific, the sacrifice of an infant child. Now, we really have to be clear about how dark this reality gets. But in a rare moment of clarity and humanity, Josué flat out refused. He backed out, mainly because he realized the demon hadn't even given him any of that promised wealth or success yet. So he decided to just cut off all contact. But as the source material makes painfully clear, you don't just walk away from an entity you've invited in.
About 2 months of silence went by. Then, one night, Josué heard this massive crash in his living room. He walked in to find a truly bizarre sensory horror. He claimed to see a massive humanoid pig literally standing on 2 legs with arms, dragging his unconscious mother across the floor. This was his punishment for the sudden radio silence. But shockingly, Josué didn't panic. He demanded the creature release his mother, and it did. But it forced Josué to follow it to a cave on the outskirts of town, actually shape-shifting from a man to a woman along the way.
Which brings us to the number 21. For 21 agonizing days, Josué was trapped in that pitch-black cave with this entity. He was forced to perform incredibly dangerous and dark rituals just to appease it and make up for breaking his end of their bargain.
The horrific climax of those 21 days resulted in an impossible choice. The demon offered Josué the ring of King Solomon, promising him immense power to summon and command demons. But the final price for this ring was a family member. On live radio, with his voice breaking and his breathing super heavy, Josué tearfully confessed to host Juan Ramón that he had drugged his own grandmother, used a knife to perform these bizarre rituals instructed by the demon, and sacrificed her for the ring. And the craziest part? Once he put that ring on, it supposedly fused directly to his flesh. It literally wouldn't come off.
So what does this all mean? Did the ring actually work? Well, according to the source material, yes, it absolutely did. Josué actually achieved his dream job. He became a highly successful and incredibly wealthy parasitologist. But that wealth came with a bizarre, inescapable contract, often called the wealth rules. Whatever money he earned in a single day, he had to spend that exact same day. He couldn't donate a single cent of it to anyone, and he couldn't just destroy or burn it. He had to personally consume it all, or everything would be stripped away from him. So yeah, he was rich, but he was essentially a total prisoner to his own wealth. And the consequences for breaking those rules were swift and terrifying. Josué recounted a super chilling anecdote on the show. He said he felt bad for a construction worker one day and handed him some money, which obviously broke rule number 2. Well, that very night, a pale, skinny woman with long hair and absolutely no feet attacked him in his own home. She held an inverted cross, which is a symbol that supposedly gave the demons immense power. In fact, right while he was on the phone with the radio station, Josué claimed this exact same footless entity was standing right behind him, mocking him.
All of this leads to one of the most infamous moments in Mexican radio history. The host, Juan Ramón, actually brought a Catholic priest, Father Roberto, onto the line to perform a live on-air exorcism. They began praying Psalm 91. But instead of helping, things escalated instantly. The transcripts from the broadcast note that the second the priest mentioned Jesus Christ, this disturbing, guttural laughing could be audibly heard underneath the broadcast. Josué began screaming on the air, suffering from severe vomiting and a splitting headache. After 30 agonizing minutes of sheer live panic, Josué literally begged them to stop. And then the call ended.
Following that terrifying failed exorcism, the timeline just goes completely dark. For nearly a decade, there was absolute silence from Josué. No follow-ups, no calls, nothing. Then, fast forward to 2011, a Mexican paranormal investigation television show called Extra Normal decides to reopen the cold case. They somehow managed to track Josué down and actually ask him for an on-camera interview. And surprisingly enough, after initially refusing, he agreed.
But of course, his agreement came with some incredibly suspicious demands. First off, his face could absolutely not be shown on camera. Second, the interview had to take place at night, on a boat, right in the middle of a body of water. Allegedly, this was because water acts as a spiritual barrier, but it's the third demand that really built a sense of dread. He insisted that Juan Ramón, the original radio host from 2002, absolutely had to be present on the boat.
When the day of the interview finally arrived, Josué stepped onto the boat clutching some seriously morbid props. I'm talking various satanic symbols and an actual dead human bone. Throughout the entire interview, he held on to these items incredibly tightly. At one point, his body even began to violently shake on camera. But he just casually brushed it off, telling the terrified TV crew not to worry. It was just a demon physically attacking him from the inside, like it was no big deal.
Now, there's a highly sinister detail that investigators and fans noticed when they reviewed the footage later on. When Josué was first greeted by the TV interviewer, Mario, Josué offered his left hand to shake. But when he greeted Juan Ramón, the man he specifically requested be there, Josué deliberately reached out with his right hand. Now, this right hand was covered in a black glove, and it was the exact same hand that bore the cursed ring of King Solomon. Throughout the rest of the shoot, Juan Ramón was visibly restless, constantly clutching his chest.
Now this is where we shift from supernatural claims to documented, verifiable facts. In the days immediately following this boat interview, an absolute wave of medical anomalies and accidents struck the crew. The cameraman, Luis Ernesto, suffered severe chest pains that resulted in emergency hernia surgery. The interviewer, Mario Estrada, was suddenly cut off on a completely empty street and crashed his car head-on into a pole, narrowly escaping death.
But the most tragic, absolute bombshell event happened exactly 10 days after the interview. Juan Ramón Sáenz, the beloved radio host who first took Josué's call way back in 2002, inexplicably passed away. Official medical records show that he died from respiratory arrest, which was brought on by a sudden and severe bacterial infection.
And compounding that tragedy, just 1 week after Juan Ramón's passing, Father Roberto died. Yes, the very priest who had tried to save Josué over the radio back in 2002 also died under sudden and mysterious circumstances. So the two men who had primarily tried to intervene in Josué's demonic pact were now both dead within weeks of his reemergence.
When the TV crew later followed up with Josué about these deaths, he firmly denied having any personal involvement. Though he did kind of suggest the demons attached to him might have retaliated on their own. But the crew noticed something really astonishing. The ring was missing from his hand. Josué claimed that he finally broke the curse. He said he gathered 7 priests, recreated the exact ritual he used on his grandmother, and actively confused the summoned demon by denying its commands. And in that brief moment of demonic confusion, they managed to slip the ring off. In fact, he claimed the grip was so tight, they literally had a machete on standby, ready to chop off his finger if the ring wouldn't budge.
As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to impartially weigh both sides of this incredible story. On one hand, you have skeptics arguing that this is just a scripted urban legend, basically a masterclass in radio theater and paranoid hoaxing that just completely spiraled out of control. But on the other hand, you have the documented reality. Look, you don't have to believe in demons, but you can independently verify the hospital records, that near-fatal car crash, and the very real, very tragic deaths of a prominent radio host and a Catholic priest right after interacting with this man.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely chilling question. Was this entirely an elaborate, tragic coincidence spun into a radio script? Or did a desperate 14-year-old's dive into the occult actually unleash a dark ritual that claimed real lives? It's the kind of case that forces you to look at the records yourself and decide where the line between reality and the paranormal truly lies. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.